good evening. It is movie night at the monotonic household, and I hope you are ready to join me. We're going to be watching a Christmas film tonight. That's right, the Hunt for Red October, which I have here on 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray, 2 discs. Is this a Christmas movie? Yes. Technically, no. So what's going on here? Well, when I watched this again for this video, I realized Christmas is not mentioned in the film. Now that's pretty wild. I actually experienced the Mandela effect because I was certain he was getting a present for his daughter for Christmas. I remembered seeing a Christmas tree in there, and that the dates were in December, like December 23rd. None of that is there. So, with no incorporation of Christmas, it's not technically a Christmas movie. But I'm going to make a ruling that it is, in fact, and I'll tell you why. Here's what I realized happened when I last saw this film and started thinking of it as a Christmas movie. I had just read the book, which specifically takes place at Christmas. Like, literal dates are provided. You know, the men are talking about whether they're going to make it home for Christmas, and Jack explicitly is getting presents for his kid. Kids in the book, actually, it's a small difference. So, in most ways, they faithfully followed this story, so it's unusual they didn't take this part. But I'm thinking, because it is really intended to be set at Christmas, that it should be considered as such, given the book. Now, normally I would say we need to stick to the text of the film for interpretation, but I think in this case we need to make an exception. So I wonder why they didn't do that since it's in the book. Maybe John McTiernan didn't want to make another Die Hard where he was doing it at Christmas. Maybe they wanted to make it more universal since it was kind of a, East and West coming together sort of thing. I don't know, but because I think it should be set at Christmas, and for some other reasons we'll get into in the chatter, I'm ruling it a Christmas movie for these purposes. Breaking my own rules slightly, but I think it's appropriate here. All right, let's get back to it. And the format for this is basically we'll synchronize, we'll kind of press play at the same time so we can be watching it together. And the vibe will be, like your annoying friend talking the whole time and ruining the film. Or you could think of it as noted film enthusiast, monotonic ASMR doing a commentary for the film. And, you don't have to watch the film at the same time if you don't want to. You could just listen or admire my ruggedly handsome film enthusiast face. Alright, so either queue up your streaming service or grab your disc. Let me know if you're watching this on physical media. And let's get started. Alright, we are all queued up here. I'm not going to play the movie on screen as I don't want to run afoul of copyright issues. I've actually made some vignettes to music that I haven't released because there's a bunch of issues there. Not everyone would see them. I kind of just staying away from that, but I'm going to try to bring images up kind of throughout just to help make sure you're staying synchronized. But I've paused it here in what my version marks as 27 seconds in, and we've just gotten the first paragraph of text. In November of 1984, shortly before Gorbachev came to power, a Typhoon-class Soviet subsurfaced just south of the Grand Banks. So hit pause there. Should be seeing this, and we're going to go ahead and hit play, and let's kick things off. All right, synchronize your chronometers in 3, 2, 1, mark. All right, this film came out in 1990, so right as we were seeing the end of the Cold War, reunification of Germany, the Soviet Union would collapse shortly after this. So some explanatory text to help viewers wind back to the reheating of the Cold War under Reagan, set in 1984. All right, so we open up with the sub leaving the naval base at Polyarny. So, folks, we really want to make sure we have our geography down. So I have this atlas, which is gigantic and unwieldy. And let's open this up so we can get a view of northern Russia. This atlas was printed after the fall of the Soviet Union, so it reflects that. Here in Russia, in the Murmansk Oblast geographic area, we have Polyarny. This area had several bases. It's the headquarters of the Soviet Northern Fleet. It would ply the Arctic and loop around Scandinavia out into the Atlantic to tangle with NATO. So, launching very far north, a cold, desolate landscape. I mean, what says Christmas more than a desolate Soviet wilderness? Get that back out again, so we get a shot of the Red October, which is a modified Typhoon-class submarine. We'll definitely talk more about the Typhoon class. First and foremost, they were gigantic boats. I mean, literally the size of 2 football fields. Absolutely enormous. And Hunt for Red October. Gigantic boats. I think the model even in the movie here is quite undersized. They're like the size of some of the smaller World War II carriers. It's kind of insane. Alright, so then that pops us over to some images of naval history where we're going to be establishing the lead character, Jack Ryan. Getting some insight into his character, which I think is very important. He's an academic. I think that's what separates this movie and the early Tom Clancy works. I actually didn't notice that detail before, that he had the Typhoon up on the computer. So a naval historian, proceedings Hello, Dr. Crusher. So I completely forget that she plays his wife in this. Later, of course, that role would go to Ann Archer alongside Harrison Ford. I think is a perfect fit for the role. But hot take, Alec Baldwin is the best Jack Ryan. He captures kind of the East Coast vibe of the character more than Harrison Ford, who did great with the role. Ben Affleck, surprisingly tolerable. The movie, question marks, but it's not quite right for the part, but he kind of made it work. The stuff with Chris Pine trying to make him into Jason Bourne or whatever, it just makes no sense. Anyway, I'm starting to rant, so let's get back into focus here. Jack afraid of flying. Alright, so headed back to Washington from London. So as noted, it is based on a novel by Tom Clancy. It was his first book. Became kind of a sensation. It was the first book produced by the Naval Institute Press. And really kind of took off. And then made Tom Clancy's name. One of the characteristics of the book was that it really focused on accuracy. Now, of course, things have been fictionalized. Not everything is fully accurate, but compared to most books of the type, the techno-thriller, there's a lot of study that went into how the dynamics of submarines and this story might work. We'll expand on that in a second. James Earl Jones, just a massive force and perfect for this role. Amiable, but also very much a professional, worldly, and a man of integrity. Impressive. And I think this scene highlights the quality of the filmmaking, the writing, and the performances. Because there's more going on here. Alright, so here we get some info. Even bigger than the standard Typhoon is insane. Gigantic boat. But a mystery here. He's from Vilnius in Lithuania. So there you go, Murmansk. Probably just outside of there, as we mentioned. So I have my beverage in a thematically appropriate vessel here. So such a great moment, Jack investigating something anomalous with the submarine, and then we kick things into high gear because it has just left port. underwater scenes in this film apparently filmed with smoke. We're switching here to the USS Dallas, which is a Los Angeles class attack sub, waiting for subs to leave Polyarny. And we have Jonesy here on the sonar with his trainee. Jonesy is, of course, named for the cat in the movie Alien. Just kidding. That's not true at all. And so they're listening, getting an unusual contact here. Los Angeles class submarine went into service in 1976, and in terms of its sensor and sonar suite, would have been equipped with the BQQ5, the TB16 towed array, and the BPS-15 system. Sophisticated sensor suite. I would assume it's probably about the most sophisticated one in the world at the time. Incredible ability to track targets as Soviet tech was getting better and better. And I'm not using Wikipedia for my reference. I'm actually using this data annex for the game Harpoon. This is the 1990-91 edition, so up to date with open source info from that era. Because, yes, I do own a copy of Harpoon. Which is a set of rules for naval wargaming. So on tabletop, pen and paper, it does have little counters, but a few concessions to modernity. And I bought this from a real game store at the time, back in the day. It was like a toy shop, and they sold a random selection of toys, but also games. Get war games. It was the only place in town to get Dungeons and Dragons stuff. It was an amazing store for me as a teenager. We got Scott Glenn here, pitch perfect as the captain of the boat. But yeah, filmed in smoke, not in water, to try to avoid some of the cliche look. I think they did a pretty good job. And here we're on board the Red October. But this game is notable because it's written by Larry Bond, who actually co-wrote Red Storm Rising, Tom Clancy's second book with Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy wrote the intro forward for this game. Because this is a slightly later version, but the original version was a game that Tom Clancy actually would play, and he and Larry Bond worked out scenarios around World War III that would become Red Storm Rising using the game. Larry Bond had been in the Navy, became a consultant, but created these wargaming rules because he felt there needed to be a civilian version that was as accurate as possible without using classified information. So it was through the information and gaming like this that Tom Clancy actually got a lot of his knowledge for this story. He also, of course, did a lot of research beyond the game as well. But the game that brought him and Larry Bond together and kind of forming that partnership. But it's difficult to play. It's the kind of thing where computers are perfect to handle all of this complicated numerical simulation. So there are some computer versions, but it's died out. There was like a weird rights problem and all kinds of stuff, I think. If you're looking for the modern equivalent, there are a couple: Command Modern Operations, and recently Sea Power, naval combat in the Missile Age, which is an early access, but is superb. A little gamier, but lots of visualization, which is not part of Harpoon. It's really about the screens and the tactics and the details. Alright, so a little bit of a digression. Yeah, you knew I was a nerd, but you didn't know I was that kind of a nerd. Actually, you probably did know I was that kind of a nerd. But this comes, for me, from Tom Clancy. Like, for me, growing up, Tom Clancy was basically lifeblood, those early books. So when I saw this game, it's like I had to do it. I actually hadn't looked at it in a long time. I opened up in some of the ship information sheets you have to fill out. I still had in there for my games as a teenager. Kind of crazy. Alright, so we've taken kind of a long tangent coming back to Ramius meeting with the political officer. Spoiler alert, setting up the idea of there being other operatives on board the boat. So yeah, the Soviets didn't like people to go off and do things without a political officer around to make sure everyone was being proper Soviets. Also the holder of the second key for launching missiles, the Typhoon class being a ballistic missile submarine. At the time it would have been Soviet Union's most advanced boat. I think it was roughly contemporary with the last iteration of the Delta, which would have been their other top-end missile submarine, nuclear missile submarine. And the Typhoon, as we were talking about, was absolutely gigantic. And I suspect the West knew pretty quickly exactly what its deal was, but the insane size of it is kind of why there is speculation that maybe it had some other type of propulsion, and that kind of inspired the possibility of having the Caterpillar drive in the actual story. I think the show kind of mixes two concepts for that drive. We'll keep an eye out for that, but the size of the boat had a lot to do with the fact that the missiles it carried were absolutely gigantic. Okay, so getting rid of the political officer. Like literally 45 feet, almost, 5 stories tall, these missiles. You needed a gigantic boat. But then there were a couple other factors, and I didn't know this. I had to look this up because I was curious. Just the pure size of the missiles didn't really seem to be the full story. And it seems like the other part of the equation was for buoyancy. So having a massive boat that could displace a lot of water would allow it to run much shallower draft, how deep it is in the water. So places like Polyarny, where having a deep draft wasn't necessarily going to work, it could navigate that. I'm going off the best info I could find, sourcing, people say different things, but it seems pretty solid. But then also, Soviet boats surface under the Arctic ice, break up through the ice as a potential way to launch missiles. So to have plenty of buoyancy available for that operation drove that huge size. So a look at a Los Angeles class boat in dry dock, and I picked up from the commentary that apparently this was a real Los Angeles class in dry dock. I think the first time it had ever been filmed in this much detail. That's deep secrets, submarine technology. Of course, some things are still not shown, like the propeller especially. So character details, right? Ryan is here to see his friend. He's more bookish smart. He's seen the world. He was a Marine, that comes out, but walks out without a hard hat area, so someone gives him that. Focused on the job. And again, seeing later in the film, we're seeing the deep sea rescue vehicle, deep submergence rescue vehicle. It's a small vessel that can be transported and connect to other subs. I really like details like that, right? He just asked about his back. It's not a big spotlight on the issue, but it helps set us up for what's coming. So his friend here is a submariner who's trying to get some insight into the drive here, or just the mystery of what's going on with those doors on the sub. Towed sonar array, so to get away from the boat's own noise, to be able to also run sonar deeper than the level of the boat. Ocean dynamics are very complicated. They have towed sonar, so on a long line. And this is where I think they mix up two concepts. Again, I'm not a submarine physicist here, but magnetohydrodynamic drive, I believe, is literally using electric currents to move seawater, help create relative motion for the boat. I think that can all be done very slowly, very difficult, versus something more like an impeller, what he was talking about, instead of having an external prop, basically a jet moving water. And I think that's generally what's implied for this drive. And I think that a next generation of subs, they were basically using the equivalent, if not exactly that, with pump jet propulsion instead of the propellers they were using here. That's a topic I would certainly want to dive deep on if I just had oodles and oodles of spare time. So, giving you my rough knowledge that may or may not be accurate. I think it's close. But yeah, it's some of those details that were in the fiction here. It's, more questionable. Again, great setup here for the role the Doctor is going to play. The dynamics between Ramius and the Doctor. Chance to meet the cook's assistant. I'm thankful for that opportunity. This is the one part of the film that doesn't sit well with me. Although I think it's there for a reason that I just realized. Interesting. So I've seen this film a number of times. I've definitely read the book a number of times. And, one of the pieces of nuclear security, and I don't know if it actually worked this way on Soviet boats, but in the U.S. military, having two separate keys, you need two officers to initiate a launch command. It would seem to me that Ramius should give the key to his executive officer, because that would keep up appearances. Like that he takes them seems just like an odd move and suspicious. But now I'm wondering if that was actually an intentional move because he wants to create a sense in the crew that maybe he is he the reckless versus someone who's trying to defect, maintaining that fiction for his crew. It might also be an attempt at suspense for the audience watching it as to what his actual motivations are. I think we all know the story so well, it's hard to judge it in that vein, but that might have been one angle there. Alright, so picking up the contact again. So the baffles the disturbed water behind the boat. It makes listening harder. Sonar is all about listening, so they want to stay on the other boat 6. One of the filmmaking aspects the director talked about was trying to make clear which boat you're on without exposition or text on the screen. And I think they do a good job. I feel like I recognize it mostly by who is on board. They have different lighting, different aesthetics. The lighting on the Los Angeles, the Dallas, is much warmer than the Soviet boats, which are cooler. I think there's some similarities between the two Soviet boats, or I'm not as sure about all of the details of that, but I think in general, that's the kind of craft that makes a film like this work, and they've done a pretty good job. So, given a rah-rah speech for this crew, this is a top-of-the-line tech for the submarine that they're on. You know, I think the Tom Clancy novel was a lot of like, yeah, Americans are way ahead of the Soviets for whatever they come up with, like our technology's better, our people are better, and, you know, like a real pat on the back kind of thing. And I do think in general that was true. I think the Americans really did have the lead. I think the Soviets also were smart. And they kept evolving, and the U.S. did have to evolve with them to try and stay ahead. So yeah, I think there's the individual sailor's capability and the raw technology for sure. But I think there's a tendency to make it all a little too easy. And that's the cool thing about Ramius. It's obvious he's as skilled as the Americans. But his speech kind of getting to that of, hey, we're finally kind of getting the upper hand for once. Distracting his men with a promise to go to Cuba. And they can't help but sing the Soviet anthem as they turn on the Caterpillar drive. This magical technology at work. I think I started to say before that they used smoke to film those underwater scenes. Actual models. It's the way it should be. CG is good for some things, but a lot of things, you know, it has a lot of capability, but tends to be used for so much. I'm taken out of the reality of things. So I think this very much puts you in the reality of things in a way that I really respond to. I don't know. Alright, plotting the course. In this era, it would have been mathematical plotting locations. You have an inertial reference system that tracks your movements based off an original fixed location. That generates inaccuracies over time, so you need to correct those. And I guess I bring that up because there's a scene I think is very inaccurate. It's there for drama, and I'm on board for that. in this film, but in terms of the technicalities, it's off. Um, but we'll look at that as we get there. Alright, they're aware of the Dallas tracking them. That famous line. So submarines are equipped with incredibly sophisticated listening equipment. That is how they survive, being able to detect other submarines. And I've read that this is true, that you could potentially hear singing on another boat. I don't know. I wasn't ever a sonarman. But it's kind of a wild thought. Maybe not everyone could, but Jonesy can. So when we first saw this film, don't know a whole lot about how it was made and that, and I mean the internet is now such an incredible source of info about everything, incredible source of disinfo and AI garbage now as well, but a lot of details about the filming, in which some of the things I read I later, once I saw the director's commentary, realized were sourced from that. Apparently this gentleman was a film editor, edited The Deer Hunter. But Scott Glenn spent some time on board a submarine, actually was treated as the acting captain, so giving the orders, having the crew interact with him as if he was the captain. And apparently that really changed the performance. It just seemed like a pitch-perfect performance from everything I've read about Submariners. But apparently that experience really provided how he approached the character, and I think he just nails it. Scott Glenn is an amazing actor. Has that kind of authority, but the quiet way he exercises it in the film, really remarkable. This one, spill the tea, meant something different. I meant literally that. Some escalation here from whatever was in that letter. I like movies that approach this way. There's people getting different pieces of information coming together. I think that, when well done, can be very effective. So his boss is receiving info, and Ryan's a nerd. Just consuming that information, not really as aware of his surroundings. And earlier in his career, he's not totally a nobody, but I think with Harrison Ford, you kind of feel farther along. Classic. Surprise briefing for high-ranking folks in the government. Not afraid to throw his employee into the danger zone, but clear directives, and he knows that he knows his material. Oh, I see. Calls out that piece of information. So one consequence of all of that buoyancy is that for it to submerge, it has to take on a phenomenal amount of water. So large parts of the ship have to be flooded to get it to dive. Apparently just a tremendous amount of water. It's made up of multiple pressure holes inside that outer hull, almost like two full submarines surrounded by a casing and then an additional compartment as well. So it's quite amazing. I mean, there's a lot going on in this scene. I think it's actually a very mature scene in terms of kind of all of the dynamics that are at play here. It's a first strike weapon is, I mean, it's not really any different than like the submarines the United States was building. Is it slightly stealthier? Yes, but each generation they got stealthier. So, but drama, and more importantly, some mystery as to what it's actually doing. Right? Keeping things in perspective. That military guy who has to fear that it's a war. People of different departments having different info. Alright, time to earn your money, right? How he handles this. Pulling out the atlas again. We get a map of Scandinavia and Polyarny behind him. Alright, so as we mentioned, Ramius is from Lithuania. Country on the Baltic Sea, was incorporated as part of the Soviet Union. Mention him being from Vilnius there. Love that line. I guess a number of the things I'm going to talk about around the craft of the film. It's like a very mature film in terms of how people behave. Yeah, you're setting up this, big grand drama between East and West and all that, and but everyone's acting from their different motivations. There's a lot of different things going on, and it's subtle in a lot of cases. Right, so he's being smart and exploring options. Right, we're going to set up a massive U.S. operation to take a tour of a boat. Now that is a quality plot line. Don't need all this crazy, wild, universe-destroying stuff. Right, he's an analyst. He's not an action hero. Right, and there's an honesty here that, yep, we need an expendable piece to do this, but it's worth pursuing. Alright, so now we go to an Alpha class sub, which is a small, very fast attack submarine. And we're going to talk more about the naming of the Alpha and the other submarines for sure. We're going to definitely dive deep on that, so to speak. So Stellan Skarsgård, amazing actor, basically a baby in this film, so young. I think I first became aware of him through Good Will Hunting, and then later realized that he's the captain of this boat here. But yeah, this is where, every time you see this boat, it's tense. People are sweaty and unhappy, and worried about the state of their reactor, which in some Russian subclasses, there were a number of incidents, and not surprising to have something like that. The Alpha was interesting. One, it's built of titanium, not steel, which is very difficult to do. So it was small, a challenge to build, but can dive to deeper depths. Initially, I think intelligence thought it could go really deep, and it can't actually go that deep. But it was enough to be concerning. So it's a small boat, and it uses a liquid metal cooled reactor instead of pressurized water. So it can run at higher temperatures, it should be more efficient, generate a lot of power. So it's basically the fastest submarine underwater, I think, still. It's designed basically like an interceptor, like an aircraft, of when we identify where a problem might be, send this thing after it really fast to try to take it out. Apparently very noisy, but incredibly technologically sophisticated. They only made a few of them. But yeah, the liquid metal reactors are challenging because if anything ever goes wrong and it cools down, then the metal ruins the pipes. It's solidified. The U.S. tried it in like the late 50s, probably early 60s, struggled to make it work. But the Soviets did do it. Maybe the French? But yeah, that Alpha boat, it's designed to run fast and go chase someone down, and that's what it's going to do. And again, cut the doctor out of the plants. The director, John McTiernan, legend, he pointed out something that I don't think ever noticed. Works very well in this scene. So they're all at the table, they're all conspirators. Putin could have caused complications. No, but they're all sitting at the table. It's a conspiracy. Frustration that Ramius has made some decisions, but he's also in charge. And I think he knows he has to go all in on this plan. But anyway, I'm rambling and not saying the point that the director pointed out in his commentary, that the camera is basically sitting at the table in what is basically an empty seat. So really the audience is, you feel like you're seated at the table, right? You see Ramius here because you're sitting next to him, you see down the table. Really interesting filmmaking technique. Like I said, I would have never noticed that without it being pointed out. But it kind of works with this kind of conspiratorial event. So interesting questions about why he does things. I think it's good to have those questions in a character. You know, people are doing things here for complicated reasons. And I don't even want to say, I think there might be more in the book. I guess the question is like, is there more with his wife, which is in the back of my head that maybe that's the case. But maybe it just gave the opportunity, and his distrust of leadership makes him want to take this tool away. There's a lot of discussion as to whether either side would really do a first strike or not. I've actually read a lot on it, and I don't know that there's strong evidence that was ever really in the plan. But I do know later on that a lot of the beliefs of Clancy around the cat and mouse game would not have played out, since Russians plan to basically just nuke carrier groups and submarines alike if the war ever happened. Anyway, that's a whole other subject and more appropriate for discussing Red Storm Rising than this film. So, sorry, I was getting distracted. Yeah, I mean, we used to live with some of these realities and theories governing our lives. Deterrence, mutually assured destruction, all that stuff was kind of the reality of foreign policy against an adversary that you didn't really know what they were up to. And then having suspicions about who they're going to meet. I gotta comment on this here. If you watch my apocalypse video, yes, that was 100% a direct reference to this scene with the medic on board the helicopter. So full on kind of shooting back to the scene. But yeah, Ramius needing to meet the right kind of captain, the right kind of person on the other side, and not knowing who that's going to be yet. Yeah, Jack's a guy who does most of his hard work with memos. USS Enterprise aircraft carrier. Commentary on how the landing was. Third wire is the target. There being 4 wires on an aircraft carrier that the resting hook can catch. He knows Jim Greer, James Earl Jones' character. Studying. It's operating a submarine. It's a lot of math. It's a lot of trigonometry. It's a challenging job. It's a high intellectual capacity job from everything I understand. Life really depends on little details of how you're operating, how you're using your tools, how you and your opponent are moving through the volume of the ocean. And then your sonar is subject to all kinds of physical behaviors. Beams can be bent by the water, all that stuff, how it propagates through the medium. Another way of saying it is they're a little more scholarly and by the book. You're not going to be a maverick just winging it on a nuclear submarine. So this is where they're setting up something that I think is pretty inaccurate. They give a justification that, well, they have very accurate maps of the ocean floor so they can do this. But that's not really what you need. What you need is an accurate understanding of your location. Which, if they had given some kind of system like a fancy GPS that worked underwater, that would help them navigate underwater, because you see he's got a ruler and pencil out. Just predicting where they are, you're subject to currents and all of these different factors. You're not exactly where you think you are necessarily. They have technology, like I mentioned, they have inertial reference systems to help establish that. But yeah, to try to dodge underwater formations, pretty dubious business. So let's take a little look at, we've got the atlas out, we're going to use it. The Atlantic Ocean, I think is the we're talking about. We're talking about this ridge undersea that comes off of Iceland. A boat coming out of Polyarny. We're going to come up over Scandinavia, then run through what the Navy would talk about is the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. So kind of funneling anyone who's coming from Soviet Russia into the Atlantic through the East Channel. So the Red October will be coming here, and they're saying it's headed for this ridge on its way over to the east coast of the United States. We happen to have a view of the floor here. So this is kind of these seamount areas that they're talking about. The channels cutting through there as you get out into the mid-Atlantic. We'll pick this back up as we get over towards the end of the film. Mark my place here. Set the tome aside. Yes, kids, that is what we used before Google Maps, before MapQuest. Yeah, Grandpa here, happy to tell you a little bit about how it was. So again, I'm going to keep saying this, but these are like characters that like have individual motivations. We don't spend a lot of time with them, but like we have a great feel for them, conflicting viewpoints, and they're operating from, he's got his boat to worry about. He's got a Soviet fleet that is potentially headed to war. There's all kinds of other concerns besides Jack's problem, and I think a lot of movies don't have that. They kind of focus on that one thing, and this is part of a much more complicated world. But a lot of human touch. And you get some insight that Jack actually had a Marine background. He can handle himself. It's just he's an academic in an academic job. But had a bad back injury. And a tough guy, so learning a little bit more about him. But yeah, more nuance in the scene than a lot of movies like this might have. And I really appreciate that. Of course, Fred Thompson, that actor, became a United States Senator after his acting career. Alright, yeah, this is what I was talking about. The accuracy of navigation and where you are located that you'd need to do something like this is extremely high. So I think this scene really strains credibility. But suspension of disbelief. This is a fun film. It's showing their quality, the risk-taking of the captain. Kind of provides some stakes here when it's just transiting ocean hoping to get to the United States. So I'm on board, but I think people who know would tell you this isn't really a thing. But that's okay. They built gigantic gimbaled sets for this, which I think is also amazing. Like Christopher Nolan's the only director working that way at this point, pretty much. He's not doing everything CG and all that stuff, so they could actually tilt like the Submarine would. The Typhoons are beautiful boats. They just look great, which in a nuclear submarine is the most important quality. Yeah, for sure. I assume by this era a lot of stuff was done with computers, but I think even into this era there was still a lot of manual plotting done, like the poor navigator is doing with getting out the ruler and everything. But yeah, I mean, if not at this point, it must have been very soon after that so much of that must have been completely computerized. Again, I have no actual experience in this area. I did not serve in the Navy, certainly. I've never been on a submarine when it's at sea, so I don't know if you have perspective on this. Let me know in the comments. This is definitely coming from my place as just an enthusiast nerd. Yeah, you really hope your guy doesn't make a little rounding error, carry the wrong number in his math here. I don't think they were unmaneuverable, but they were giant. I don't think they were super maneuverable. Did he just put on a seatbelt? I don't know what he was doing. That would be pretty amazing if he was putting on a seatbelt. Sam Neill, such a terrific actor. Kind of guy you can really trust in his roles like this. Of course, Jurassic Park being the prime example. Again, that was really when I knew who he was, and then go back and realize that he played this role. Oh, this is a big deal. I don't know if you've ever had an issue where your magnets aren't cooling, but it's not good. So, of course, the nuclear reactor on your boat, everyone's especially worried about issues with it. Hope they don't have any further problems with their reactor. So interesting choice. Not silent, gonna make noise. Again, I wonder if it's trying to establish him being a little reckless and crazy. And this is like, I think that's a great detail. Right, he's shut the guy down, like the captain is the boss, and he knows what he's doing. I think he acted that he had his questions himself about that decision. He saw something similar where at the dinner, the conspirators, he didn't agree with Ramius, but he waited until the others were gone to disagree in private. Very appropriate move for that type of relationship, I think, on board a sub. Sonobuoys being dropped by the Russians. Literally what they sound like, little buoys you can drop from an aircraft that have sonar in them. Used to help hunt down submarines. I don't know, I think that these scenes with these two just really work. They kind of earn their way. Like, I think he's not portrayed as just a chump. Yeah, he kind of gets the butt of the jokes, but I think even his character, like, he knows what position he's in. And they're all playing a game. Alright, so Bear. That would be the NATO reporting name for the Tu-95, which is this aircraft. And I like that those guys seem like they're kind of bored out of their minds. So overflown by the multi-engine turboprop. That's bad news because that really means it's probably an anti-submarine aircraft. That's basically what they would expect at low altitude over the ocean. But yeah, I think hunting submarines and aircraft like that, you spend long hours doing it. It's easy to be bored, even if they're on high alert. But let's talk about that name, Bear, and Alpha, the submarine, Typhoon. So NATO had reporting names. There you get a shot of it. It's going to drop a torpedo since it had a contact or sonar buoy. So when the Soviet Union produced some piece of military hardware, you didn't necessarily know what it was called, and I think even if they did, NATO chose to assign them names that would be easy to transmit and understand. So they gave them effectively code names, like calling the sub Alpha, the MiG-25 Foxbat, the Bear, which is a bomber. And so there was a code to how that worked, right? The first letter would match the type of aircraft. So bomber, B, like we have the B-52, the B-1. Bombers would start with B. So Bear, Badger, Backfire, Blinder. Torpedoes gone active, homing in on them, using its active sonar. Fighters, Foxbat, Flanker, Frogfoot, Fishbed. So it starts with F, it's a fighter, and things like Fishbed, like Foxbat, these are kind of weird. Intentionally so, because they were meant to be words that weren't commonly encountered, thus it'd be very easy to parse that information. If it's a C, like Candid, Condor, these would be cargo transports. And so that was how NATO, when they identified a new piece of Soviet hardware, they would assign it a name based on those different guidelines. It works for missiles and radar systems. It gets complicated, but it's pretty easy to tell, like a fighter, because it's going to start with that. The thing I didn't know until I looked this up recently is that if it's a one-syllable word for a fixed-wing aircraft, it means like propeller-driven, and if it's two syllables, it is a jet. So a backfire is a jet bomber, but that Bear has turboprops, so it has a one-syllable word. Didn't know that. Helicopters, they don't do that, and then helicopters, of course, as you might expect, start with H, Helix, Hind, etc., but they didn't do the two-syllable thing. So submarines, Typhoon, that's not. Wind back. Submarines were handled a little bit differently. They were named after the NATO alphabet. So Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot. For whatever reason, that was the scheme that was chosen for Soviet submarines. So you could have a Juliet-class submarine, a Kilo-class submarine, a Delta-class submarine, right? Alpha. But then you get Typhoon, which there was a Tango submarine. Well, I had to look this up too, because I was familiar with some of those older submarine names, but then I was curious. So apparently in the 80s, they changed, and they stopped naming after NATO alphabet, presumably it's a limited set of options there. So sabotage. And they started naming them things like based off of Russian words, as I understand it. So you get typhoon, you get Akula, which was an advanced attack submarine. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky as you get into this era. At the time, back in the day, like certainly everyone knew them by the NATO reporting names. Now a lot of stuff's become public and we know what the Soviet names for them were. So NATO called an attack submarine the Akula. And we called this, nuclear missile submarine, a boomer, a typhoon. Well, apparently what the Russians called this submarine was Akula, which is Russian for shark. So the typhoon is actually an Akula in Russian, and I don't know what the Akula is. I think it's something hard to say. I don't know. So if you're seeing the mix of Russian NATO names, it'd be very easy to get confused. But yeah, there was that switch over to a different naming scheme in the 80s. Alright, so that bear was causing some problems, hit one of the F-14s, was coming in for a crash landing. So there's a lot going on besides Ryan's problem, though they're interrelated, of course. There you see the ships charging down from what we were talking about earlier, Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. Basically how they're flowing out of the Atlantic, chasing after the Red October. That's where he's making that analyst money, spotting those subs there. So there were a lot of cases, I think, of, folks getting close and mixing things up. Exercises were always a stressful time. Particularly if political tensions were high as well. It was a real thing. Where it could feel like you were close to something going awry. It's a dangerous way to live. It was nice when we got away from that for a while. Maybe we never really did, I don't know. Anyway. The stakes are going up. I think that's the key thing here. I think if you're an airplane enthusiast, this scene drives you nuts. Obviously, there's a continuity issue there. The F-14 coming in, and then I think it's an F-9 Panther actual crash footage, Korean War era. They cut into. I think I would have tolerated some CGI there to make that more consistent. But small detail. This is actually a real thing. It's very difficult to communicate with submarines. They want to stay underwater where they're not going to get radio signals. You can use extremely low frequency things which take a long time to transmit a small amount of info. So sometimes they'll come up prescribed times for communication, but generally not an easy problem. They certainly don't like to be on the surface transmitting messages. They want to be hidden away in the deep. So that's kind of the details that Clancy put in. I think a lot of stuff. Of course, there are going to be differences, and you need to have differences from a book to a movie. They're never going to be the same, and the concept is flawed to think that they should be. But I do think they set out with true intentions to make this as close as they could. They did have to modify things. Thermal layer, you get a pretty pronounced change in temperature, which affects how sonar travels through, affects what you can hear. So they're commenting on that, key part of sub operations, managing things like that. Shark, Akula. Well, normally Chester likes to, watch a film like this, but he's nodded off. You might hear him snoring. He's being pretty cute over there under the Christmas tree. Cowards, every one of them, afraid of a saboteur, I swear. Contemplating going to Canada, Ramius knows how foolish that would be. Should have followed that up with something to enhance that as a joke, but I drew a blank. Point is, they think America's a better option. I think the freezing before they get to Labrador was really a comment on the fact that they need to fake an emergency and throw them into the ocean in life rafts. And he wants to make it a little more comfortable situation for them, which I think is nice. It's thoughtful. As a child, you don't know what a conversation like this really means in terms of what's going to happen in the film, but I think as you see a lot of films, you start to realize they're setting some stuff up there, sadly. I've heard that the term Crazy Ivan is not used in the Navy. I don't know who made that up. If it was Clancy or... I assume it was Clancy. The activity they do is real, to turn and clear the baffles. That's the actual thing as far as I'm aware, but the term, not a thing. Kinda can't help but see the filmmaking here where they're trying to take audiences on board who aren't going to be familiar with the technical details of all of this. So you have the trainee who doesn't know anything even though he's serving on board the boat, giving a chance to explain things for the audience. It's fine. I think to be nitpicky, I would prefer it to be done differently because it seems obvious in retrospect, but I don't know. It's the things you see when you watch a film multiple times and you have some awareness of how these things are made. I really can't fault it. It's a challenging thing to do to make this kind of film where the action isn't explicit, or it's not very visual form of action. It's a more intellectual challenge, how those boats are interfacing and who knows what and how. Since I've broached the idea of craft, I'm going to point this out just because now I'm thinking about it. But I think many films try to do this, but ones that are particularly effective do it well, which is you kind of have to set up all of the pieces and get the audience looped in on kind of how the story's playing out, what the general goals and the overall situation is. And then you kind of get to know people on a deeper level, which is kind of adding more emotional stakes. I think they do a pretty good job of that in this film. That's what you were getting there, that there's personal stuff that's driving Ramius. You have the wants of his XO. And you start to get to know folks like Captain Mancuso here, even Jack Ryan more as we get deeper in the film. And I love that, right? They're not thrilled that the hero is coming, they're pissed off. Their mission is interrupted. The thing that they're supposed to be doing is being thrown off by what they assume is some wacko plan from leadership. I commented that I think he's the best Jack Ryan, I think, in terms of if you think about who the character is from the books. John McTiernan in his commentary mentioned that he had to really push and work with Alec Baldwin to get him to deliver this performance that he, I think, probably wanted a more, I don't know, he has a tendency to play parts in a way where he's more at the forefront, maybe more noticeable and quirky, and keeping him focused on that idea that he is really more of that analyst. That he's a normal guy, and I think that's why people like the book so much. One, it was exciting. It's just a well-written thriller, but he was an everyman sort of character. Someone who was smart, and that was valued. Our technology and science were highly valued at the time. This is a real thing with the static electricity on helicopters. And so the guy with the hook, that apparently is a thing that they do. The hook is grounded to the boat to dissipate the static electricity. So, imagine being Steve, who was the first guy to figure that out the hard way. Poor Steve. But yeah, apparently this is a thing. So there's a protrusion on the side of the boat. You kind of saw it there real quickly. Um, I only just learned this recently. Um, that's actually where the towed sonar ray is stowed, in that little bulge on the top starboard side of the sub. It gets extended out and then hauled back in, but it's in that fairing. Jack, just going for it. Now's the time. Jack Donaghy, he's a winner. Jack Ryan, of course. So I mentioned that apparently Scott Glenn spent some time on a submarine learning how things worked. I think there was some other actors who might have done the same. But they also used a lot of U.S. Navy in the cast. Basically a mix of actors and submariners to get kind of both train the actors what to do and have people who really understood how things work, so you get more of that veracity in the behaviors of the supporting cast. And then also apparently on the Russian boats, most of them were actual Russian immigrants or people of Russian heritage who were in the LA area that they recruited to kind of give a more authentic look to those faces and the language and all of that stuff. So those are the kind of details that you maybe don't necessarily see on the surface, but really imbue this with a lot of texture and help create that real feeling. I think it all kind of adds up to why this film works. So great. It's like you've screwed this up. Key piece to set things up, the Jack Ryan doesn't smoke. I mentioned the low frequency communication. That's VLF, very low frequency. That's what they're talking about. Some form of coded transmission they're getting. Alright, switch it to a one-on-one conversation. Nice detail. Like, let the captain know what's really going on. This is perfect. Goes to all the trouble, and as he arrives, they get the change in orders. This is another piece that stands out to me as being sort of odd, as to why they're diving so deep. And I want to say that's about as deep as the boat can go. You get the sense of it moving in 3 dimensions, like, I don't know, because the little details, they immediately go back up to depth in this next sequence. It feels a little bit like they just needed to do something that felt dramatic. But I don't know, maybe there's some reason. Yeah, now make it 500 feet, so nice. I do think down that deep they're less detectable, so while they're doing their thing, maybe. It just seemed kind of funny. So, you have to plot where you are, you have to plot where the other guy is based on the small amount of information you get, like a bearing tab. Do what they call target motion analysis, I believe. If we should do a video really diving into that and that kind of math, let me know. Be happy to focus our ASMR efforts on that. This is kind of the same as the scene with the National Security Advisor, right? I'll give you a couple minutes to listen to your idea, because I'm going to not rule out any option, even though things seem pretty clear. Right, this is where Scott Glenn is very much like the captain, right? He's going to do his thing, he's going to follow his orders. I'll listen to you, but we're not going to play around. Jack making the call. I just love the moments between them, but then that is fantastic. This is someone who's always keeping the situation in mind, and as soon as the situation changed, he made a bunch of noise, which he would never do, in order to start the conversation, because he now is open to the idea that something else is going on here. So, total understanding of his craft, and I think he knows, well, I guess we're going to get a sense of what his adversary is like. These are both top-notch captains, super cool under pressure. And these dynamics are a conversation between them. I don't know, it's impeccable work. And I'm, instead of just watching it and, sitting here with the dog and shoving popcorn in my mouth, this exercise is giving me a chance to think more about some of these details. You feel them. But yeah, it's almost like a courtship, I guess. Each is doing very specific things that are sending messages because they know how things operate. They receive them in certain ways. How does this match versus the norm? How does this match versus what he should be doing, right? This is where he's identifying the skill of who he's facing, and also that the situation isn't escalating. This is really well done. I think it's like, oh, it's a good thriller, and there's Let Them Sing, and there's the one ping only. But when you kind of, those are fun, but I think why this has more longevity is because of these pieces, these characters, how they relate, that they're professionals, they're adults. Things happen because of their motivations. My criticism of a lot of modern stuff is that people do things just to do them, keep the drama going or whatever, and they're less motivated, there's less craft behind it. It's designed for different interactions, binge watching versus, weekly shows or a movie or whatever. Things change, tastes change. I really like works like this. Maybe the kids like different stuff. It's less about superheroes, more about practical realities, but I don't know. There's also far more diverse perspectives today. I don't know, there's never an ideal state, I guess. But what I want from the kids is for them to get off my lawn. I'm ranting like an old man. But yeah, silliness aside, I do think there's a lot of craft in a film like this that makes it what it is, makes people still watch it. And then, of course, the actors are insanely good. Like, Connery is amazing in this. Scott Glenn is great. Alec Baldwin, I think, nails Jack Ryan. You have great supporting cast like Sam Neill, Stellan Skarsgård. I want to say the NSA's name is Robert Jordan, and I feel horrible that I'm blanking on that. He was in Dune, the old one, amazing. Alright, we're going to have to get out the charts, folks. Mandated by the film. Alright, he's looking off the coast of Newfoundland. Laurentian. Which is also known as Laurentian fan. Here, so off the coast of Newfoundland, you have the continental shelf, and then it falls off into much deeper water, and that's what Jack is looking for. A hilarious line, trying to do this complicated conversation, and then, do I even know how to transmit Morse anymore? So yeah, they've progressed their way across the Atlantic towards Newfoundland and looking for a place to ditch the boat. One ping only. Iconic. His crew doesn't even want to do it. They know it's the wrong behavior. Sam Neill's so great. Again, I'm noticing details that I think that was him playing, that he gets that this is a successful communication. I'm not sure I read it that way before. But it's definitely, it's an unusual situation, some suspicion. The Banks of Newfoundland. It's a great song. Stone and sand. Referencing a sea shanty here, sorry. I'm in the spirit, but I don't have it at hand. It's been a while. Be apropos, very apropos. I should have prepared that. Alright, so we've gotten close to where we need to be, and we have all kinds of problems. So this is where it all plays out. Right, to make this work, they needed someone who wasn't in on it and used them. It's great detail. You know, I think people will go on board your story if you don't do that. They'll just accept what people say and do. But this film earns it. It sets that stuff up. It's very motivated. So yeah, this is where they built kind of a typhoon for this out of some barges, but it's small compared to the real boat. Like if you see pictures of guys on the deck of an actual typhoon, it's insane. The other thing I picked up from the commentary that I watched was the director talks about the challenges of filming on the water, and you know, it's notoriously difficult. Think about Waterworld, some of the most famous, crazy, filming experiences ever. And he commented it's kind of not so much the mechanics, but they found people would start to get seasick, and you really only had about 3 hours because started mentally struggling. He talked about that Connery, who's like incredibly precise as an actor, never misses lines, that after 2.5 hours would start flubbing his lines when they were on the water. It's just how you like mentally go off as you start to get more and more physically affected. So his comment, it was very challenging to have like 3-hour days to shoot this type of stuff because people just weren't functional after that period, which I think is interesting. I'd never heard anyone say that before about filming water scenes like this. I know they did some filming in the Puget Sound area. I think a lot was filmed off of LA. I don't know what was filmed where. He probably said, but I'm not paid enough to pay that much attention. No, I'm kidding. I think they had a mix of stuff, but stuff actually at sea. They weren't using like big tanks or anything at the studio. I have the U.S. ship on the scene, firing some shots over the bow, I believe. new for the time Seahawk helicopter. I don't think those are really in service at sea until the mid-80s. Should really Google this sort of thing before I speak. But an important part of anti-submarine warfare for ships like that, to have a helicopter they can send out, drop zone buoys, search for submarines, and fire torpedoes like this. There's like a complicated set of events that kind of work out here for the dupe, and it's like mostly planned. I think they get a little serendipitous. I think it all works. It's like a little complicated. There's Greer, Skip Tyler's with them, of course, from Amadeus. Great to see him in a role like this. Reuben James, I should look up what kind of ship that is. Probably a destroyer is my guess. Skepticism about the CIA. I don't know. So here they're using one of those DSRVs to go over to the Red October and get on board. It's a little scene, it's subtle, it's brilliant. The quality of the writing in this is very high. This isn't just some random, thriller action movie. It is. But the writing standard is very high. I'm just going to keep saying that, but I just admire it. Right, they're going to an uncertain situation. You're going to be prudent. The captain has a responsibility. The whole thing is like a challenge, and Ryan has a certain belief, but like, is anything 100%? And apparently that guy is a real captain of one of these vessels. The guy's playing the captain here, so it's one of the cases of a real Navy guy being part of the film. Yeah, it's big. Russia's had a number of accidents with submarines, and yeah, this is what I was getting at. Ryan's sure. But are you really? It's not overplayed, it's just it's the reality of the situation that they're grappling with, and I think they play that super well. But yeah, Russia's had a number of submarine accidents, and I believe it's at more than one occasion the U.S. has offered assistance. I think it was almost always rejected. I think the offers of assistance were genuine. I think there's sometimes a hope that they get intelligence out of it. When the Kursk incident happened in 2000, post-Soviet era, I'm pretty sure there were a number of offers made, and I don't think they actually helped. I think it was refused, but would have been, I think, a candidate for something like this. DSRV, go try to get any survivors out, but I think they weren't any, was the reality. One thing that director pointed out, I read this, is like the pretty clever way they handled the Russian in the film, where initially they speak Russian and there was like a transition moment, and then they just speak English, so it's just easier for everyone. And then now, of course, they're going to a foreign situation, so they set it up again where the guy speaks Russian, and then they're gonna, have a chance for character interaction with Ryan and Ramius, but then shift out of it again. It's great. It's tense. Everyone has to respond to the situation. Don't know how it's really going to be. Everybody's sizing everybody up. Ryan takes the initiative. Right? He doesn't smoke, but he has to do something, right? Like, it's his, this whole plan's his baby, it's his call, it's his effort. Like, he has to be the one to take the first step forward. Such a simple thing, right? Cowboy with his gun on his hip, having to ask. Ryan shows he knows Russian. Right, and it sets up the shift back to English. It's perfect. And this is great, right? It's a human moment, but they're still down to business. And he's not happy about it, right? No one's just kind of given in here. Everyone kind of has to hold their ground. Apparently the guy who plays Jonesy, I didn't know this, was like a Broadway actor. He did terrific in this, and I think did more movie work, but he had to be convinced to come to movies. Right, and now it's formal. For asylum and handing over the boat with the defection. And these two bridge the gap. Right, shifting power dynamics. Jonesy with the ears. Ah, the alpha is finally showing up. Everybody tense. A mistake? Surprising. So, if they weren't all paying attention to their systems, then it's so good. It would be a surprise, but I'm pretty sure the U.S. ship and the Dallas would have been very, very aware of that submarine being inbound. The challenge is, what could they do about it, though? The answer is nothing. This is great. So you're actually not someone who's all that useful. It's calm and cool on the Dallas. It's perfect. It's all just set up so well, right? Two captains know the game, and Scott Glenn knows that's wrong. But Ramius knows something he doesn't. And it's such a perfect setup because Ramius is still the captain of this boat, and Ryan is not in the Navy, so he follows the orders of Captain Ramius. You could say it's a trust thing, but it's a really interesting dynamic. And then they're going to switch off, like it's just professionals at work, and that's quality. Right, that's a tough one for the Navy sailors because they know what's happening. Ryan, I think, has faith. That's perfect. Yeah, torpedoes about to hit us. Let's make a little chit chat. You write books. By the way, you're all wrong. I read something about that. I think it's in World War II, Halsey, I think, moved his force. It should have been protecting against the Japanese fleet. And like the actions of a few captains, I think, really ended up saving what could have been a huge disaster. Don't know all the details, but I just did a quick look into that. Halsey is given a lot of credit, I think, for Pacific in World War II, but yeah, like I said, I don't know all the details. So yeah, there was a surprise, but we only get away with that trick once. Right? He's trained him. He knows exactly how that guy works. And our KGB plant. Oh no, he's not going to get to go to Montana. Yeah, that's a bummer. It's a life and death business. So unusually, the Typhoon has its nuclear missiles, submarine launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, forward of the mast and the command center. Almost every other submarine that carries missiles like that has them aft. I don't know why they did it that way, but it's different. That is how they did it. That's a very Doug DeMuro type of statement. Tautological. So has the potential to not necessarily set off a nuclear warhead, but probably destroy the boat. Alright, so now we gotta push Ryan into being the hero. hero. But this is where Bart Mancuso has taken over being the captain of this boat. Ramius left and now he's in charge. It's like such a, I don't know, just the dynamics of the situation I think are very well executed. So Typhoon class would carry 20 ballistic missiles, and this size looks pretty accurate. Huge, 5 stories tall. The one thing that I think is wildly inaccurate here is that I mentioned earlier you have to bring in all this water to be able to reduce, take away that buoyancy of a boat like that. And so they have massive tanks that fill with water and ballast tanks that allow the boat to submerge. And I think that includes all of the area around the missile tubes, not the missile tubes themselves, but that whole compartment. So I think the idea that there's like this big empty space with tubes that they're wandering around in just wouldn't happen in practice, that this space would actually be filled with seawater. Maybe depending on the ballast tank, full or not, I don't know. But I do think that's a Hollywoodism. I don't know that we knew that at the time. I don't know how recently that information has come out, but I believe that is accurate. I had to do some research before this, just so I wasn't talking out of my rear end. Guy on YouTube, Subbrief, does profiles different subs, and got some information from some of his video on the Typhoon. I think he's pretty knowledgeable. The green and red makes this boat feel pretty distinctive at this point. Again, they're all sweaty. That's the main detail. Feels like a Top Gun kind of moment. I don't know, man. But hey, teamwork makes the dream work. They're gonna do an emergency blow. I think some of those guys, I'm not sure all of those are actors. I think some of those guys might be Navy. But yeah, emergency blow, drop some countermeasures to make noise, try to distract the torpedo. Going to the surface as quick as they can. So that is a very aggressive surfacing, and I'm pretty sure they filmed that for real. That they had a Los Angeles class submarine, the Navy let them film doing that maneuver. And they went for it, which is pretty cool. Jack, he's a Marine. He's an analyst, he's an historian. I think he wants the situation to play out differently. It's very genuine. But there's also a choice that's going to be made. George Lucas would later edit it so the saboteur shoots first. For now, this is the cut of the film that we have. Alright, something that they know how to do, but it's a tough situation. But he's a cool customer who has a plan. It's so calm and cool. This is what it is. This is where I was saying there's kind of serendipity in the plan, but awareness of who knows what, right? They don't know there's another submarine down there. So, no idea that that would be the alpha. Of course, this is just all this work with these scenes to set up such a beautiful moment here at the end, which of course was like the flag waving, moment for America, but that is still such a fun setup here. Right, he gets to know that something more has happened. I like that. You could play this in a way where that isn't there. I think this is better. So, I don't know. I assume he would call it differently, but maybe he knows how NATO would refer to it. I feel like maybe he would have said, which boat? Brilliant. Heading upriver. So I learned something from the director's commentary that actually, it was a bummer. So great moment, right? Ramius and Jack bond, fishing with their grandfather, the connection between East and West. And this gets to the heart of why this is a Christmas movie to me, right? So, is it set at Christmas? Yes. Does it happen because of Christmas? No, and that's a lot of people's key definition. But for me, when it comes to a Christmas movie, I think what puts it over the line is, it needs to have something Christmassy in it, but is it really about the best values of Christmas? Not like religious platitudes or capitalist platitudes, but like the essence of good things about the concept of it. Brotherly love, kindness, looking out for the downtrodden, family, problems of greed. And this is about two people who might be enemies coming together, two peoples who might be enemies coming together. It's like literally brotherly love and peace, goodwill to men. Well, that makes it a Christmas movie to me. And that is the part that bothers me, because I just learned from John McTiernan's commentary that Christopher Columbus did not say that quote. It was written for the film and attributed to him. So Christopher Columbus is one of the great garbage people of all time. Just horrible. So it's not that I have any attachment to that. It's such a beautiful sentiment, and I really wanted it to be rooted in something historical. But the fact that it's made up does sit wrong with me. I wish there was some different factor there, but Still a beautiful quote. And Jack has found some peace, and he's gotten a gift for his daughter. That's right, and the credits roll. This was totally an experiment. Thanks for watching. It's a challenging thing to do. Lots to talk about in this movie. Stuff we could dive deeper on, but terrific film, one of my favorites. I think one that stands the test of time because of its qualities. And a good message that we can come together. It's usually our leaders that divide us more than people who tend to share the same challenges and aspirations. It was made at a period where it seemed like we would move beyond that, and maybe there's more that's required than just borders falling. But in the spirit of Christmas, everyone can come together. Just a cracking great film, so much fun. Definitely love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and have a wonderful evening, and wish you all a Merry Christmas.